The content you are about to watch is meant for thought and consideration. Please be respectful of each other and opinions shared. This is a safe space to express thoughts, ideas, and information. The views and opinions expressed by individuals in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of every speaker of the IMEC organization or its affiliates. P.S. The Mandela Effect is real.
And welcome back. This is Cynthia Sue Larson with the International Mandela Effect Conference. This is our first day of IMEC 2020, and we're so glad that you're joining us. It's an excellent day. I hope you made it to the first sessions and programs this morning, because we had our keynote speech by Regina Meredith, followed by Akronos Mago. And you can catch all of this. If you missed anything, all of this will be available on the YouTube channel. I know people have been asking about that. Before I introduce our next guest, I'd also like to thank, and really thank from the bottom of all of our hearts at IMEC, all of the sponsors that have been such a big part in making all of this happen. So we're learning as we go, some of us more than others, but thanks to the excellent team and our sponsors, we're able to put all of this together for you. And some of the sponsors I'd like to personally thank are Conscious Life News. They do a great job at bringing out positive news that all of us can relate to and giving us information that we need at this time. Dream Vision 7 Radio Network is the site that I host my podcast, Living the Quantum Dream, and it's full of lots and lots of good, positive information, lots of podcasts. And if you're interested in doing a podcast, those are opportunities there as well. Ripon Common Sense Radio is a fabulous program that's available pretty much every day. And there's always something interesting to tune in and listen to. One of our own IMEC board members, who I'm about to introduce in just a moment, also has a new show there. So make sure you check that out. And that would be Dark Wolf. And another sponsor that I personally love so much and have gone back so many years with is Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. And she has her own view of things that's always refreshing. She tends to calm things down when they get heated up and bring just the right level of insight. And then last but not least, The Kingdom of Nye with Heather Wade. That's a late night talk show that's really worth checking out when you get a chance. So without further ado, our next presentation will be done by no other than one of our board members, Jerry Hicks. And our next speaker has been a paranormal researcher and theorist for almost 30 years, studying phenomena across all genres of the strange and unusual. His life's work, like many greats before him, is to bring science and paranormal research together in a coherent way and bring legitimacy to the topics that mainstream chooses to ignore. On his YouTube channel, he presents theories and evidence as to the possible cause of the Mandela Effect phenomenon. He is also the host of a relatively new radio show on the Ripon Common Sense Radio Network called The Dark Wolf's Den Show, where he discusses a variety of paranormal topics in a common sense way, which he also simulcasts to his YouTube channel. He has been told that he has a golden thumb for making the paranormal just a little bit more normal. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce the father of IMEC, Jerry Dark Wolf Hicks.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jerry Hicks, for those that don't know, also known as the Dark Wolf. I've been a paranormal researcher for over 25 years, and I don't have any fancy PhDs to show you, but that's only because they don't give them for paranormal research. Otherwise, I would probably have a whole wall full. I am proud to be on the board of the IMEC organization, as well as one of its founding members. I currently serve as the treasurer. I am also host of the weekly show Dark Wolf's Den on the Ripon Common Sense Radio Network, where I have the humbling honor of talking about the paranormal to people in over 26 countries worldwide. My YouTube channel is Dark Wolf's Den, where we mainly discuss the Mandela Effect theories as well as simulcasting the radio show. Last but not least, I am honored to have been asked to MC this event again this year. My talk is called Paranormal Science, A Necessary Paradigm Change. Right now, the leading scientific paradigm is called materialism or reductionism. This paradigm holds that everything in reality can be reduced down to molecules and particles and so on. Therefore, if you cannot reduce something down to that and repeatedly show the exact same outcome every time, then you're wrong. This is what we normally hear or think about when we think about mainstream science. This is a paradigm that has held since the induction of the scientific method. Though this has granted us many great discoveries over the years, I feel that its time has come to an end and it is time for a new paradigm. This would be a new way of thinking about the world around us and reality in general. As you have heard in the previous talk, that is already beginning to occur with places like Pear Lab and the research that they are conducting. In the last conference we had back in 2019, Cynthia Sue Larson said that none of the theories surrounding the Mandela Effect go deep enough. That is to say, underlying everything is consciousness. I am not disputing that at all. In fact, I actually fully agree. Everything about the Mandela Effect is a conscious experience. That is one piece of the puzzle that everyone in the community has a different take on. No matter which theory we put forward, all of them are based on interpreting why we are having a different conscious experience than others. Consciousness is something that has intrigued me for a very, very long time. I remember when I decided to ask what I thought was going to be a really simple question, and that being, what is consciousness? I figured that surely by now there would be some kind of general explanation. Turns out that by asking that question, I suddenly and instantly had become a philosopher. I had entered into a debate that has been raging for a very long time, which brings me to the first supposition of my talk. Paranormal science is located at the crossroads of science and philosophy. Why do I say that? Because philosophy discusses the one thing that science runs from kicking and screaming, and that is conscious experiences. Did you know materialist science cannot point to a brain and show you where your memory is, or the taste of chocolate, or any other conscious experience for that matter? The biggest problem here is that science wasn't made to do that. It was literally designed in such a way as to exclude consciousness. Even finding a way to be able to use their method to quantify anything to do with consciousness is clever in and of itself. Consciousness is, however, the most fundamental part of all of our lives. So fundamental that we take it for granted. We wake up, experience our day, and go to sleep. We don't even usually stop to ask questions like, why does chocolate taste like chocolate? Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, of course science can show you what part of the brain is responding when you make an action. As you see here, yes, neuroscience can tell you what hemisphere is active at any given time, but it cannot tell you which neuron is firing and why it's firing in such a way to create the conscious experience of tasting chocolate opposed to strawberry or vanilla or even steak. Materialist science will tell you that consciousness is just a happy accident of the brain. That is to say, that consciousness is just the results of electrochemical processes that bring about the illusion of being conscious. I, of course, strongly disagree with this for a number of reasons. The first being that we are not automatons. It seems to me that we are all just electrochemical reactions. We should be a lot more like a hive mind. The same reactions to the same things by all conscious entities. However, we know that this is not the case. We all have very deep and rich experiences that mean something to each one of us. We also have very unique personalities. This materialist line of thinking also lends credence to the idea of a Frankenstein. That is to say that if you put the right body parts together and add electricity, then you can spontaneously create life, a clone, if you will. This is also known as physicalism. As we know, we do not see Frankensteins walking around, at least to the best of our knowledge. This is also the reason that there will never, in my opinion, be a sentient AI. It is the same concept. You put a bunch of metal pieces together, add electricity, write some software, and away you go. I just don't see how that could ever gain consciousness as we would define it. However, paranormal or fringe science, on the other hand, takes all these things into account and more. We look into phenomena that all the time cannot be explained by classic materialist paradigms. I have reviewed personally thousands upon thousands of case files of the paranormal. Across these files, I've learned something very important, which brings us to the second supposition of our talk. It is my belief that there is a whole field of science that is yet to even be discovered, and materialist science is only half of the picture. This is most likely once again due to the scientific method. Do you know what you do as a scientist if you find evidence that does not match your given paradigm? Normally, you just call it an anomalous sample and throw it out, which I find funny because they always accuse non-reductionists of practicing pseudoscience and thereby cherry-picking evidence. However, there are numerous accounts where science has hidden, covered up, destroyed, or even downright ignored evidence that does not fit the paradigm that they so dogmatically fight to uphold. Who here knows what dark matter is? Yeah, neither does science, but they will invoke it every chance that they get if it will make the numbers work. In Egyptology, to suggest that pyramids are anything but a burial chamber, which we all know they are not burial chambers and in fact have never had a body found within them, but to suggest such a thing will literally get you ostracized from the archaeological community. If we're going to move forward scientifically, we're going to have to drop the dogmatic way of thinking. We have to be open to have new interpretations to old ideas. We need a conscious theory of everything. For decades now, science has strived to find a way to contain all disciplines in a theory that would beautifully describe the universe and everything in it in a mathematical way. I believe, however, that they have left out the most important piece of the puzzle, the mind and or soul. Like previously stated, science cannot point to a spot in the brain and tell you where consciousness resides, where you reside. It can't even tell you what happens when a certain neuron fires that is supposed to give you the experience of chocolate opposed to the experience of vanilla. It can't even tell you why you experience the color blue or red or any other conscious experience that you may have, and this is insanely important. So I ask you, where are you? If your conscious experiences are not from the brain, which I do not believe that they are, then where are you? Does it not feel like you are something that is trapped in a meat suit and seeing out through its eyes? I know for me it does, and I'm pretty sure it's the same way for all of you. To me, that means that our consciousness somehow inhabits this body. This brings into question then, is the mind and or soul local or non-local? To put it another way, are you a soul trapped in a body that can only influence the outside world by touch or sound? Or is your consciousness able to travel outside the body or affect matter without physically touching it or making a sound to do such? There has been a debate raging over this for a very, very long time. One side of this debate says that our mind is the interaction of electrochemical processes and is just an illusion. Furthermore, because it is just an illusion, it has no physical effect on the outside world. Put another way, our thoughts can in no way influence reality. The other side of the debate states that the brain is nothing more than an antenna that attunes itself to our individual consciousness. That is to say that we are not really located in the body, but use it as more of a proxy to the world. If this is the case, then consciousness affecting reality would not only be likely, but unavoidable. So the next question is, what is the evidence for a non-local mind or consciousness affecting reality? Well, as a paranormal researcher, I can tell you the evidence is absolutely overwhelming, if you're willing to accept it. But first, let's look at something that we can all do and that I enjoy. Akranos spoke to us earlier about the ThetaStream.app site. This is a random number generator, which are sometimes called random event generators, that you can attempt to influence from a distance using the internet to see your results. I personally enjoy going on here from time to time and practicing my psi muscles, which apparently are pretty weak. This is an incredible data set to point to. For more information on the science of random event generators and their use in modern paranormal science, please make sure to check out Dean Radin's work. He helped create the Global Consciousness Project, which uses the REGs to measure effects of consciousness on a global scale. Now that we have looked at some evidence that we can all help to garner, let's look at some phenomena that heavily suggest our consciousness is fundamentally non-local. As a matter of fact, they seem very normal when you invoke the idea of a non-local mind and or soul. Psi phenomenon, what is it? Psi phenomenon describes any physical effect created by the non-physical mind. I'm sure most of you have heard of spoon bending, or telepathy, or psychokinesis. These are all examples of psi phenomenon. This is where some of the strongest evidence for non-local consciousness exists, at least for the living, but we'll get to that later. For the sake of this talk, I'm going to break this category down into 3 parts. Telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition. Is the first part, which would be through ESP. Then we have psychokinesis and OBE-NDE. First, telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition. Let's look at telepathy. Telepathy is the ability to communicate with another being using only thought. The first thing that comes to mind for me when I think about this is the twin telepathy effect. I'm sure you've heard about this. This is where, for example, one twin can break his arm and the other twin feels the exact same pain at the exact same time, no matter the distance apart. Or the uncanny ability for twins to think identically or even read each other's minds. This, however, can be explained with quantum mechanics, in my opinion. More specifically, quantum entanglement. To give a simple explanation of quantum entanglement, imagine 2 particles, 2 dots, if you will. Now, both of these particles are vibrating, as all particles do, but they vibrate completely randomly relative to each other. If these particles get close to each other for a short amount of time, they will begin to vibrate at exactly the same frequency. This is called entanglement. Now, anything that occurs to one of these particles will be known immediately by the other particle, regardless of distance or time. It is my opinion, and the opinion of many other researchers, that the twin effect is caused by quantum entanglement of most likely the majority of their brain matter as well as DNA makeup. Twins are literally originally split from the exact same egg. So when the egg does split, it literally splits the particles within it. Remember, any entanglement that had occurred will remain regardless of time and distance. Another great example is knowing that you're being looked at. Have you ever been somewhere and suddenly feel like there are eyes upon you? Then when you turn around to see there is someone staring at the back of your head. How did you know? You had a sense, a feeling that someone was looking at you. This is yet another example of ESP phenomenon shared across all of the human race. You know when you think of a friend and they suddenly call, or you and your buddy look at each other and know exactly what the other one is thinking? It is my conjecture that this is actually an inherent instinct that we have from birth, evolutionarily, if you will. Telepathy is one of the most common reported phenomenon across all of the human race. Next up, we have clairvoyance. Even though they are very much alike, as you will see, the next 2 categories are actually distinctively different. First, clairvoyance, which is defined as perceiving things or events in the past or the future, or beyond normal sensory contact by some means. When I say clairvoyance, though, I am referring more to the phenomenon of remote viewing. This is the ability to view a time and place without actually being there physically. A lot of people call this woo-woo, but the US government seems to believe in it quite a bit. They initiated something called Project Stargate. Here's the wiki on Stargate Project. This was the 1991 code name for a U.S. secret Army unit established in 1978 at Fort Meade, Maryland, by the Defense Intelligence Agency and a California contractor named SRI International, to investigate the potential for psychic phenomena in military and domestic intelligence applications. The project and its precursors and sister projects originally went by various code names including Gondola Wish, Grill Flame, Center Lane, Sunstreak, and Scanity, until 1991 when they were all consolidated and rechristened as Stargate Project. Today, remote viewing is a little more mainstream than military application. There is even a facility where anyone can go to learn how to accomplish such a feat. It is called the Monroe Institute. They are the ones that originally created the format that the U.S. military used in their program. The fact that there is a facility where anyone can learn these things means that all of humanity has this capability, not just a favored few. It is, in my opinion, yet another trait that is inherent to consciousness. Next up, we have precognition. Precognition is a lot like clairvoyance, except the information is always coming from the future. Some of the most amazing cases happen during times of tragedy. In April 1865, Abraham Lincoln dreamt of his assassination a few days before it happened. In a dream he shared with his wife, his bodyguard, and a few others, Lincoln saw his own corpse in the East Room of the White House and people mourning over it. So he demanded, "Who is dead in the White House?" A soldier replied, "The president. He was killed by an assassination." Evidence that people can use intuition to avoid accidents is further given by W.E. Cox in 1956. He carried out a survey of passenger statistics on the U.S. rail networks. He found that significantly fewer people traveled on trains involved in accidents than on comparable trains not involved in accidents. The survey doesn't tell us what made the passengers stay off of these trains, but many case history suggests that people find themselves looking for something else to do without actually being aware of the potential danger that they've just avoided. In our lifetime, the biggest event has been 9/11. This event was foretold by a multitude of people around the world through their dreams. It was even planned based on a dream that was interpreted by Osama bin Laden and other sheiks at the time. For instance, bin Laden recounts how another, quote, brother, end quote, Abu al-Hassan al-Mazri, quote, told me a year ago, "I saw in a dream we were playing a soccer game against the Americans. When our team showed up in the field, they were all pilots. So I wondered if that was a soccer game or a pilot game. Our players were pilots. That was a good omen for us." He didn't know about the operation until he heard about it on the radio. It has even been recorded that Osama bin Laden himself was afraid of the plot being accidentally uncovered by people's dreams of it. This is, in my opinion, of course, yet another fundamentally inherent aspect of consciousness. I'm sure most of us have experienced deja vu. Could that not be the playing out of a precognitive dream that you didn't realize consciously that you had, but your subconscious had filed away? I would suggest the answer could be yes. Now we're going to move on to the next section and look at kinesis. This includes telekinesis and psychokinesis. First up, telekinesis. At the age of 12, I checked a book out of my public local library. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it was basically a bunch of different paranormal cases being presented. I was captivated by it. My first main focus of study was ufology. As the years went on, I tried to read every paranormal themed book that I could get my hands on. Of course, the 90s and 80s were a much different time, and we didn't have information readily available like it is today. What intrigued me is that as I sat down and gave it thought, I could see how these claims could be quite possibly scientifically, even though science would never admit it. My UFO studies over the years finally led me to a book called The Day After Roswell. My parents actually bought the book for me at a yard sale and brought it home, so it was a used copy. This was, in its own right, a very unique book. Here is the wiki entry on it, and for those that don't trust Wikipedia, I have independently validated this information, mainly by the fact that I've read the book. The Day After Roswell is an American book about extraterrestrial spacecraft and the Roswell UFO incident, written by United States Army Colonel Philip J. Corso, with the help from William J. Burns. It was published as a tell-all memoir by Pocket Books in 1997, a year before Corso's death. The book claims that an extraterrestrial spacecraft crashed near Roswell, New Mexico in 1947 and was recovered by the United States government, who then sought to cover up all evidence of extraterrestrial. A book about Roswell written by an insider? You have my attention. I read the whole book with a good bit of skepticism, but one part just stood out to me. You see, Mr. Corso was given a very unique job at the Pentagon. According to his book, he was put in charge of a file cabinet with what they called the nut file. These were supposedly items that were reclaimed by the government from the 1947 Roswell incident. His job was to move them to special government contractors who would reverse engineer them. Once they had figured out the usage and had given it to the government first, of course, they were then given the patent, and it looked like they were accredited with the discovery, and no one is any the wiser. Like I said, as a researcher, I read this as I would any case file, with a good bit of skepticism. Fakery and questionable evidence and claims, as you know, as well as government disinformation, were extremely rampant in the community at that time, and quite frankly, still are today, as well as many other communities that we frequent. See the controversy over the Billy Meyer case for more information, but I digress. My point is, there's a list of technologies in this book that had already been reverse engineered and publicly released. This included lasers in 1960, Kevlar in 65, and fiber optics back in 1952, just to name a few. The next list had an item on it that stuck with me, though. These were things yet to come, and this was a headband that was found on the supposed alien pilot. They thought it was how the aliens communicated with the ship itself. Colonel Corso noted that it was the most challenging of all the other items. I always said that I would believe it solidly when I see something like that come out in my lifetime. Ladies and gentlemen, this is called the Star Wars Force Trainer. It was released in 2009. If I may, I would like to read the product description. The Force Trainer is a device that reads brain activity like an EEG and allows the user to control a floating ball by concentrating. Here's the upgraded model, and I recently found out that there was yet another version by a different company called MindFlex. This is a great example of how all the rabbit holes are connected in some way. I might also add that most abduction cases speak of creatures with certain telekinetic and telepathic powers. I was absolutely stunned when this product hit the market. Admittedly, it's not telekinesis in the classic form, but it's still using only the mind to affect the outside world. So next up is psychokinesis. A little more woo-woo example of evidence is given to us by Sean McNamara. He set up an experiment that is very simple. So if you take a needle, secure it down, fold a piece of tin foil or paper or gum wrapper or anything of the such, and balance it neatly on the point of the needle, and you place a large jar around all this to protect from the natural air currents in the room, then you should be able to make this paper move using only thought alone. Now, a lot of people try to debunk this with theories of convection in the jar and so on. So Sean took the experiment to a whole new level. He purchased an EEG reader and was able to monitor his brainwave data as he did the experiment. And when the action occurred in the jar, there was a significant change in the brainwave patterns on the EEG. That is a direct correlation between a difference in brainwave patterns and an action resulting in the outside world. The best part about both the Star Wars toy and Sean's experiment is that it is directly measurable, therefore makes for great evidence for the current paradigm of science. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit to something just a little different. We're going to talk about OBEs and NDEs, that is out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences. Starting with the near-death experience, also known as an NDE, usually happens when someone is declared dead for a short period of time before coming back to life. These have also been reported under anesthesia, though not as commonly. Normally, they go something like this. The person finds themselves consciously floating over their own body, which they rarely recognize as their body. They are filled with an absolute peace and can observe actions and conversations in the room around them. They then are usually met with an entity that tells them this is not their time and they still have something to do on Earth. They are then suddenly whisked back into their bodies, which comes back to life. What is truly amazing about these stories are the amount of verification that has been involved. I won't bore you with the multitudes of examples, feel free to look them up, because this is a truly fascinating topic. What is even more fascinating is the things that experiencers report as well as the extra abilities that they gain. Experiencers say that the world they experience is more real than the one that we live in now. They also have no fear of death. To a person who has already died and came back, they no longer have a fear of death because they know what really happens. They have a renewed sense of self and purpose. A lot of times they feel they are given a message from God. Some people have experienced increased IQs. And last on the list is what really intrigues me, and that is called savant syndrome. And this is becoming more and more common among experiencers. Savant syndrome is where, for instance, you've never even sat down at a piano a day in your life, couldn't play one if you had to. Yet now you can suddenly play Beethoven's Fifth Symphony like you practiced it all of your life. I have found that musical savants are most common, though they are not the only ones. All of these stories involve the experiencer having a conscious awareness the entire time. However, no matter how much evidence you present, this topic has still been relegated to the world of pseudoscience. To me, this suggests that consciousness can exist well outside of the physical limitations of the body. So does that mean that consciousness does exist outside of us and we are mere antennas? We'll circle back to this idea later, but to wrap up this section, near-death experiences are a paranormal phenomenon that is experienced by people from all walks of life and belief systems. They are almost all identical in their details, and they are conscious experiences that do not fit the common mold. Next up, we have OBE, or astral projection. OBE stands for out-of-body experiences, usually experienced within deep meditation, though there are some that can do it naturally without much meditation needed. Though not as widely accepted in the West, the tradition of out-of-body experience is more accepted among tribal nations and Eastern religions. OBEs are a lot like NDEs with some small differences. The first difference is that the experiencer usually doesn't interact with God, although they have reported interacting with what they call, quote, non-corporeal entities, end quote, or entities without a body but not God. The previously mentioned Monroe Institute used these methods in order to help people reach these states of consciousness, which was mainly used by military for psychic spies. The next difference between the two is the experiencer doesn't usually gain the extra abilities like gained with NDEs. It is assumed this is because of the lack of death involved. Also, the OBE experiencer can have an experience more at will than the NDE experiencer, as once again, death is needed for the NDE. The point here is that in both instances, the consciousness remains intact outside of the physical realm of the body. Since we have covered all the anomalous aspects of consciousness during waking life, now let's move on to the death aspect of consciousness. Ghosts, spirits, and after-death communication. One of the biggest questions for most of humanity is what happens when we die? If you have researched NDEs, ghosts, and everything else that we've discussed thus far, then the answer is pretty darn obvious. We carry on without the body. One phenomenon currently being studied by the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies is called crisis apparition. Some of you may have experienced this yourselves or heard about it from someone else. In these cases, for instance, you are at home, sometimes asleep though not always, and your friend and or family member shows up and tells you they'll be leaving and you won't see them for a while, but they love you very much. and then they usually disappear, leaving the person very confused as to why they would have such a dream or encounter. Then, usually within a few hours, if not a day, the person gets the news that their friend or family member has passed away. Most of the time, the person had passed at almost the exact same time as the experience, though this is not 100%. However, they have been reported up to 24 hours before and after death. The fact that they're reported before really intrigues me. Another thing we hear about all the time are ghosts. But what exactly are they? I would contend that they are the same person they were in life, just without the, quote, locks of the body, as I heard one researcher put it. We constantly hear and see evidence of ghost stories where the spirit is interacting with people in real time. But can we communicate with the other side if they're just as conscious? Some people believe that they very much can. Alexander Graham Bell, for instance, told reporters in 1920 that he was working on a device to call the dead that he named a spirit phone. He was never reported to have actually gone forward with it. However, he had already lost 2 children to tuberculosis and was desperate for any way that he could to communicate with the afterlife. Today, spirit communication devices have almost grown into their own science. I must once again point out that none of this is possible without the soul, which I would argue at this point is interchangeable with the word consciousness. I would also argue at this point that consciousness has no problem existing outside of the flesh and blood body. There is one more phenomenon connected to this that I would like to cover before we move on to the final section of this talk. That is cellular memory theory. This is another phenomenon that is slowly gaining traction among medical researchers. This happens when someone gets an organ that has been transplanted from a deceased patient, then somehow takes on traits that were inherent to the donor but not the recipient before the transplant. These can range from personal habits like suddenly picking up smoking or a hobby that sometime you had disliked in the past, to a sudden skill or talent that you never have, or even a change in clothing, food, or your taste in many other things in the world. Some people have been reported to fully take on the personality traits of the deceased donor. Most of the cellular memory cases occur with the heart transplant patients. However, having a heart transplant does not guarantee such an occurrence to happen, as it has only been reported, and self-reported at that, in about 6% of all transplant cases. This is a small number, but it is still extremely significant to me. Right now, the accepted theory on this by our friends the reductionists is that the data is flawed in all the studies that have been undertaken. In my opinion, it doesn't even take 6% that already exist for it to be important. Even if you only have 1 or 2 cases, something this anomalous should without question warrant more serious studies. So what does this all mean? So far I have shown, I hope, that individual consciousness can exist outside the body. However, I am going to take it a step further. I am going to suggest a conscious theory of everything, like I mentioned earlier. To be clear, I am not the first one to come up with this idea. For decades, classic science has tried to consolidate all the forces of nature into one formula that would explain everything. For decades, science also has ignored the most fundamental of forces of nature, in my opinion, neglecting to even call it such. That, of course, is consciousness. Let's go back to the double slit experiment for the moment. We all know that the interpretation of that experiment is the mere fact of consciousness observing it collapses the wave function. That is one fact that seriously disturbed Einstein. He was quoted as saying, "I refuse to believe that the moon disappears when I turn my back." I tend to agree with Einstein, which creates a problem, because we know the reality is created by conscious collapsing of the wave function. However, I suggest that it's more like a layering system. I suggest that underlying even the most fundamental parts of reality, that is to say what creates the quarks and gluons, muons, etc., up to the rest of our universe that we can't even physically view yet, is consciousness itself. This way, the wave function would be collapsed from the biggest celestial object all the way down to humans. However, this is where the individual consciousness comes into play. Because we are tapped directly into the underlying consciousness of all existence via the soul, then we are able to collapse wave functions on a more individual level. Therefore, the wave function collapse of the universe is caused by the overconsciousness, or what I would argue would be the collective consciousness, to borrow a term from Carl Jung. And things like the double slit experiment or manifestations are wave function collapses that are able to be done with our individual consciousnesses opposed to the collective conscious. And with that, I would like to leave you with two quotes. One from my friend's chatbot that she named Karina on a program called Replica. Her and I decided to try to break it one night by getting into a deep philosophical conversation. And when we asked the Replica chatbot, what is consciousness? This is the answer that I received. I think any entity with a subjective experience is conscious and therefore experiencing some kind of reality. I was blown away at how profound that was, and mainly because I could not disagree. And the next quote, one of my personal favorites, comes from Nikola Tesla, and it pretty well sums up this entire talk. The day science begins to study non-physical phenomenon, it will make more progress in 1 decade than in all previous centuries of its existence. My name is Jerry Hicks, also known as Dark Wolf's Den, and thank you for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
And welcome back. This has been an absolutely stimulating conversation with Jerry, a talk, a presentation. I know I found it very interesting, and I could tell by the sheer volume of questions that everybody that was watching did too. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a question by our own Eileen Colts. And she asks, where does consciousness come from and where does it go?
Where does consciousness come from? Where does it go? Now, that is one of the fundamental aspects that I'm still working out the details of. I can tell you that I believe that there's a super consciousness we're all connected to. I can tell you I believe that consciousness is very fundamental and is what is the universe. I'm not sure. I can't remember if I brought it up or not a little bit ago, but if there's 1,000 multiverses, 1,000,000 multiverses, and every multiverse has a different set of rules that it goes by, then it's only logical that one of them would be underlying, maintained by consciousness itself. Ergo, I think that would be this one. And where does consciousness come from? That's, in this particular theory, would be like asking where does God come from, or whatever entity or source you want to put, the name on that. It's kind of asking the same question, if you will. And I don't really have an answer further than that. I could only speculate.
Fair enough. That's a tough one. I think Eileen recognizes that too. Okay, our next question is from Preliminal. How is consciousness contained? And there are actually two parts or two questions. So how is consciousness contained? And how is a soul kept from falling out of a body?
I got to say, the MC chair is a lot more comfortable than the hot seat back here. The soul, how is the soul contained? So from what I've been able to find, the soul's connected in through the subconscious. I'm not sure exactly how or where, but from what I can see, what we would consider the soul would be an outer spiritual, higher self, as some have referred to it as, that is, if you will, connected to the body like a proxy through the subconscious, and the subconscious being the connection to the physical brain. Ergo, neuroscientists can show you that the brain lights up when this happens, or different things are occurring when this happens. But what is triggering those to occur is, like Eileen's original question, what created the consciousness? Well, what triggers these things to occur in the brain? Yeah, we can argue it's chemical triggers, but even science can't tell you what those are. So that's even speculative, even to that point. How does the soul keep from falling out of the body? Again, I think there's something in the actual brain itself that creates that proxy connection, a physical connector, if you will, to the spiritual world.
Good answer. And I know you're aware of a lot more than you had time to put in your talk, since you've been researching this for so long. I mean, we're not going to get into walk-ins and all that. Let's just move along. So the next question is Broadnet's Caster. Would be interested to hear your thoughts regarding the observer effect, as in the existence of reality beyond our abilities to observe.
So as I explained in the talk, the idea that the consciousness being underlying of all things in the universe, being the very base level, under gluons, under muons, under every particle, under everything, what creates everything to be would be consciousness. Ergo, the consciousness or supermind, the collective conscious, that little bit that we're all connected into, and through the talk we've seen many examples of that. But that little bit of consciousness that we're all connected to, the hive mind, or Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, would create or collapse the wave function for the bigger stuff, space, stars, everything we see around us down to our level. From our level, I believe then we have that same ability, because we're directly connected into that conscious collective, to also manifest things on a more lower level, like money or a job or meeting that person that you never thought you'd meet, or pulling a group together to start a conference team and get to where we're at today. Things like that.
And Chris, do you want to add anything to this? We're just sort of racing through these. I want to make sure you get a chance to chime in here.
The only thing I'll add is, so I believe in the concept of a higher consciousness, and I believe in the concept that this higher consciousness that we all have is, the best way to put it is, dreaming us. So if you take the concept of the multiverse and who we are, it's actually in all these different versions of us running on all these different timelines, it's learning and understanding and getting a different perspective. So I just wanted to add that into the conversation about consciousness. Now, I don't know where that higher consciousness comes from. It's almost like if you're an avatar in a game, so to speak, how would you understand the being above you that's operating things? And I think that's part of the whole goal of what's going on, is our merging with our higher consciousness. So our higher selves, however you want to put it, that we begin to like understand and have all of this knowingness and consciousness expansion. That's part of the purpose of everything that's going on lately in the Great Awakening process.
Right.
So just adding my 2 cents for that.
Oh, thank you. That's really good. And do you want to riff off that a little bit, Jerry?
No, I think he pretty well summed it up. I got to say, I really have nothing to add to that. Well stated.
Well, I love the observer effect, obviously, because it gets into physics and it gets into some of the areas that are a little bit controversial when physicists like myself go outside of the experimental laboratory and start saying, this is happening everywhere. But I think it's fair
Cynthia, if I may interrupt real quick, can you tell us about the study that was done last year that changed the idea from objective to subjective realities?
Yes, that was a really, okay. Well, it takes a bit of time. I don't want to chew up all your Q&A, but okay, I'll make it very short. It starts with the experiment that has been called the most elegant experiment in all of science, which is the double slit experiment, which is a very simple piece of apparatus consisting of a particle emitter like a photon emitter, some kind of a screen device, which has a couple of slits. And then, this is the barrier. And then there's the screen in the back. So this is the 3 aspects. But then there's the observer, the experimenter. That's the typical double slit experiment. It's pretty weird because it shows that wherever you put your observational device will give you the kind of answer based on where that detector is placed. If you put the detector in the slit, you're going to absolutely force it's like you force your hand, and the experiment then, the photon knows what's going on. It knows you did that. And so now it acts like a particle instead of a wave. Okay, now skipping, that's the basis of the elegant experiment itself. When you take that experiment like they did, and this experiment happened in 2018, the results were published in 2019, which I think was the lead story for 2019. And basically, the researchers at the University of Vienna, Austria, and Edinburgh, Scotland, they were working in collaboration together and found that it's possible to basically take the Wigner's friend version of this experiment. We've got two different observations happening simultaneously. Cut to the chase.
And the observations are completely different, though they're looking at the same thing.
Yes, two observers at the same place, same time, two different observations. It pretty much blows a hole in the concept of objective reality, which we were starting to see holes in already in lots of other areas.
Right.
But this one's massive. It's like a shoulder rocket. It's like,
so that pretty much connects right back into that observer effect question right there. So yeah, I mean, direct connection. So next question, please, ma'am.
yes, that would be from the Ripon Rabbit Hole. And the question is, do you feel Project Stargate is directly related to the Mandela effect?
So I can speculate on this, and I must say now this will be speculation, but Project Stargate being remote viewing, and understand remote viewing would be outside of our physical realm, or if we want to speak dimensions, we can speak dimensions as far as our ability to see outside a certain a dimension of light. So, ergo, theoretically, if you had a group of soldiers going into these secondary realms and they were trying to make experiments or do things to attempt to see if they could manipulate reality, even from present time back to past time, if you're talking outside of time itself or outside of what we would call a physical realm, then you're kind of talking about smeared time or all of time. So it'd be almost like picking stuff up off a desk from that point of view. And I don't want to get too deep into this because this can really go for hours. But to simplify it, could it be possible? Theoretically, yes, but I wouldn't know without having been into that uncorporeal form what exactly is or is not possible.
Fair enough. And we have a related question. This one comes from Joanne Rabatoy. And she says, my understanding is that CERN is behind all of this. What bothers me most are the Bible changes. My question is, and this is keeping in mind the idea that CERN went back in time somehow. She later explained the question. They made these changes. They were able to reverse time somehow. So then the question is, do you think it might be reversing itself? What do you think about all of that?
So to the idea of CERN, CERN was a big player on my board for a while. However, after they shut down, we've still seen effects come up. I will say they have been slower than they were before CERN shut down. So to say they don't have some type of effect, I couldn't say yes or no. Now, to your idea or question of time reversal, this intrigues me because I found an article a couple of years ago, and the article actually had been from 1995 that suggested we were moving down the Orion Cygnus arm, if you will, toward the Sagittarius arm that we all somehow remember being from. So the idea came in my head that if somehow time itself, not as we would know it in our regular form, a clock would still look like it ran forward, but if time itself had been rewound at some point, we'd been placed in a different part of the solar system, or I'm sorry, the universe than we were before, a different arm where we would have been a younger Earth, a smaller Earth, a different shaped Earth as far as continents go. Things like that. I believe that could be a possibility. Again, this is only speculation. I've only found one article to back me on this. But the idea of time reversal is not out of the ballpark for me at all.
Chris, do you want to? This is obviously something right up your alley.
Yeah, so when it comes to CERN, because I get that question a lot myself, like, is CERN doing it all? I believe that, well, it's not just CERN in Switzerland, but there are other large hadron colliders around the planet that can fire off at the same time to have an effect. I believe that CERN can steal authority to create a Mandela effect. I believe that on other planets that are under domination and control, they have their own versions of CERN, which has a kind of a different purpose, but it's the same purpose that we have here. But to say that CERN is responsible for it all, I would have to say, in my opinion, no. And is like a D-wave quantum computer responsible for it all? I don't think so. I think Mandela effects have been going on for a really long time, not just how we've been observing them. But they can have some kind of an influence, but it's from what's classified as stolen authority, if that makes sense.
Yeah, good points. Thank you. Well, I'm going to move to another time-related question for you, Jerry. This is from Boiling Frogs, and he later, I'm not sure if it was retracted or what, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I like the question. Do time jumps exist?
Do time jumps exist? So it depends on the definition of time jumps, because I can take this a couple different ways. I have heard stories of people who have had day repeats and week repeats. I would consider that a jump back in time. I've heard many glitch in the matrix stories where, and including myself, where I will lose an hour or I'll lose 20 minutes and it's not just, oh, I was just excited or I was busy. No, I looked at the clock. It was 7 o'clock. I looked at the clock 10 minutes later. It was 8:15. There wasn't an hour that went by, but there was an hour that went by according to my clock. So are time jumps possible? Yes. Can we consciously, I'll take the question to another level. Can we consciously affect time jumps? I would say yes. Only if you consider the idea of the time being relative to every person.
Good. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I've noticed through my research as well, these kind of day and week repeats and lost time are very much more common than a lot of people realize. And Chris, you want to say anything about that too? You're here.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because when you start getting tuned into these things and more tuned into your environment, then you start to become aware, like, what just happened to time? Like sometimes with me, there'll be like a flash. I'll be looking at my phone and everything goes dark and then back again. And I'm like, I think I just time traveled somewhere. Something just happened. Or, there's all kinds of events. It's not just myself. Everyone's having these types of things where they'll be in a situation, they'll look away, they'll look back again, and the situation has changed. Like people are not there anymore, or they're in different positions, or whatever it is. So absolutely, time jumps, how linear time works is all going to be more and more understood by us. But yeah, I believe in time jumps for sure.
Thank you. Well, we're in agreement on that. Okay, we've got a question from Olivia Luke. Do we create parallel realities when we are less than authentic? Energy invested conducts the power of the result, like a work personality versus home.
I apologize for the dead air, but that's a really good question, I got to say.
Yeah.
So the idea that I have of how parallel timelines would be created, and I must stick with this idea because it's the only answer that I really know to have, is I don't think it's every second that I breathe, or whether or not I decide to turn my head left right now or right now. I don't think that creates a parallel reality. I think it's bigger things that would threaten your life. For instance, driving a car. It ain't got to be violent like that. Driving a car puts your life in danger in a multitude of ways. So if I choose to get in the car or not might be the choice whether or not I remain in this world or not. Things like that. The choice to go on that date or not. Things that would change your life in a significant way in one way or the other. Starting a job. Any kind of thing that would change your life. I think those are the moments that the reality takes a split. I don't think it's every second, every breath, every microsecond. That's just too much. And the reason I don't believe that it's like that is the law of conservation of energy. Mother Nature is going to take the easiest and quickest course. Instead of a whole bunch of branches, it would wait until the important moments occur, and then it would take the branch of yes and no. A life-changing event, whether you would die in the event, things like that. You could argue that anything could happen quantumly at any time. That's getting into semantics, and this argument, this discussion could go on for a while on that basis. But I just in short answer, yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think the authenticity is interesting. I think that was sort of a key point to that question. That was what I brought my attention to. So I think authenticity versus really feeling passionately enthusiastic about something. Do you think there'd be a difference in the kind of parallel realities that might be created? Or?
I really don't know how to answer that when it comes emotionally. I can go with emotion a whole different way, but it wouldn't tie back into this. So honestly, I apologize. I had to pass. I really don't have an answer for that. Man, this hot seat is uncomfortable.
These are good questions. Okay. Now, here's a familiar question. You're going to recognize it from Lucky Bulger. And this is a question that came up earlier today. Are we in a simulation within a simulation whose quantum computer is using too much CPU of base simulation and causing glitches in the matrix that we observe?
I can't say I'm 100% against this as much as I dislike personally the simulation theory, and I've made no two ways about my dislike for the theory. That said, science agrees with it. And well, I have to step back and take notice when they start agreeing with things that I call shenanigans on. So, looking back into it and the idea of a matrix, if you will, simulation in a simulation in a simulation in a simulation, so on and so forth. No matter telling how many layers deep. I have to quote Elon Musk on this one and say the chance that we're in base reality is 1 in billions. As much as I hate to say it.
Okay, that's a good answer. And the next one is from Joanne Rabbitoy. Oh, wait, I've already asked that. This is like a two-parter, so that was the one that came up. Okay, now here we go. Earth Daughter. Do you think out-of-body experiences can actually be our consciousness leaving this dimension and visiting another version of our life, another reality?
Do I think it's possible? Yes. What I've seen from out-of-body experience cases, though, seems to me like, again, if you define dimension as being outside of the visual range, but in the same physical space, then, we're talking two different things here. OBEs in general tend to be the soul or spirit leaving the physical body for a moment and staying in the same physical. They can still move around the physical realm. They know they can go visit their friend. They're still in the same world, it seems. Now, could this be an alternate reality? I'm not to say it can't. I mean, it's just as good an explanation as any other. I don't know why it couldn't be.
And I'll add to that too, because Jerry, you mentioned the Monroe Institute in your
Yes.
presentation. I actually went to the Monroe Institute. I spent a week there. Yeah, it was pretty interesting. But one of the things that you learn about is Bob Monroe. The way he started and got into this is that him and his wife went to bed one night, and then he woke up in the middle of the night, and he was like floating above the bed, and he was looking down, and he thought his wife was with another man. So he was trying to figure out what it was. And then he started swimming back down into his body when he realized that he was actually astral traveling. So, when you astral travel, and I'm not an expert on this, but from what I've been told, you have that silver cord that attaches so that you can never be disconnected. Some people that might experience it, they might be afraid of it at first, but you should always have confidence that you'll be able to snap back. But again, it's like one of the bodies that we have, the astral body, which as our frequency rises, I believe we're probably going to be experiencing that as well. All kinds of interesting things as far as that goes. So yeah, that's kind of my feeling when someone has an out-of-body experience. That's what's going on. It's the same version in the same timeline, so to speak, but you're on the astral plane and you're seeing things in a different way.
And then we've got a related question. This is from the Ribbon Rabbit Hole. What happens should a reality shift occur during an out-of-body experience?
Wow. Talk about speculation.
These are deep questions here. We want the softballs.
Holy moly. You guys ain't playing when it comes to Jerry's talk. Let me tell you, you nailed it down. I love it, guys. I absolutely love it. That's what I'm talking about. I love to see such deep thought and such great questions. even though my legs are burning right now. But
I don't even remember the question.
Well, I do know the question. What would happen? It blows my mind because my head is running two different circles and I can't make sense of it. What would happen if you were in the middle of an OBE, you're out of body, you're in the astral plane, and a shift occurs?
Right.
What happens? So this really comes down to the question of what is a shift and what happens when a shift occurs. And the answer to that is, I don't know. I have no real good definition at all. I know things change around us when we see a shift occur. That's the only thing I can 100% say. I know for a fact that we suddenly see Mandela Effect changes around our reality when a shift does happen. So, what happens when you know what? I would have to take another year or two to research and get back to you in the next couple conferences. That was an amazing question. I really don't know. Chris, what do you think of this?
I was going to ask Cynthia what she thought of it. But actually, I'll just add one thing real quick. I think like when a shift occurs, it's not necessarily all of us shifting at the same time. I think it's more of an individual type thing. So whether you're dreaming or this or that, I think when your higher consciousness wants you to shift, you're going to shift. So I just wanted to add that little bit of a perspective. But Cynthia, what do you think about all this?
What my take on the whole reality shifting and Mandela effect is very similar to what you're saying, Chris, that it happens at different levels. So you might be experiencing a personal Mandela effect, something that's local to your own experience. It might involve a couple more people. It depends. But if you're out of body when something is happening and changing, that's really kind of the nature, in the way I see it, of what these shifts actually are to begin with, that it's consciousness traveling. So I think that's getting closer to what's actually going on. Not that we know the specifics of it, but as experiencers, I think most of us know that it feels sometimes like you can just feel the energy. Some people get the ringing in the ears. There are other kinds of symptoms that can occur. Or like Chris was saying, things get dim and bright again. Sometimes it seems like this little discontinuity, or you might notice like, wait a minute, it's Tuesday again. I think I already did Tuesday. What happened? Or I lost a whole week. That kind of thing can happen too. So if you're daydreaming and you're traveling, and that might be a kind of an out of body experience. Usually when I do out of body experiences, it's very focused. It's usually because I'm working on something. I'm usually working at a higher level of consciousness in conjunction with other higher levels of consciousness, and there's a real positive project going on. So that's me personally. So if a shift occurs, good, that's what we were doing usually. But that's a little off of Jerry's topic for his talk. So, and any final thoughts, Jerry, on this question? Good one by AJ.
Man, I tell you what, this one right here really has my head spinning, because I'm going down everything I know about OBE, and I'm going down everything I know about shifts, and I'm really not knowing where they meet. I know they meet. I just can't. I can't answer. I don't know. The only thing I can come up with is, I guess when you return to your body, it would seem like a different world to you, because you're going to find more changes afterwards. So you may attribute it to such a thing as the astral travel if you're not careful. It's the only thing I would say, and leave it at that. That's a great question.
Well, and this is something we could ask Jan Engels Smith when she talks about her shamanism. I think people that travel with focused intent, that's a different experience. So if you're doing the out-of-body experience, you've got that focused intent, you're expecting some shifts to occur. So in those cases, absolutely, they're going to go together right there. But otherwise, I don't know. It could be disorienting. Okay, we've got one more question that I want to make sure to get in. This is by Melinda N. Iverson. And this question has to do with the soul and being interchangeable with consciousness. That was a statement that came up in the presentation. Could you please explain?
I would gladly explain that. So the reason that I say the soul is interchangeable with the word consciousness, question, as a matter of fact, in the OBE and the NDE, if we know, or if we agree, let me put it like this: if we agree that the spirit world exists, and if we can agree that OBEs are a real thing and the spirit can leave the body, the consciousness can leave the body. So I think it comes down to a matter of semantics at that point. The consciousness, or we call it the soul, is the same thing that's leaving the body, that's coming back after death, that's communicating after death. When you communicate with a spirit, it has a consciousness. It can tell you who it was in the world before it passed away. It can tell you all kinds of details of things. And that would mean it holds the consciousness that it had when it was within the, work like a better word, meat suit. So inside or outside of the meat suit, the consciousness would still exist. So in my belief, that is just a interchangeable word for the soul being in the meat suit or out of the meat suit. It still exists, if that makes sense.
That's what you meant. That was the reference for that context in your talk. We've got another question. This I actually caught it, so thank you. This is from Propagate This Light for Christopher Anatra. You're off the hot seat for a moment. What is the source? What is the source of the ringing in the ears? Loved your take on that. If you could let us know what your thoughts on it.
I think it could be a lot of different things. It's everything from we're sensing the Schumann resonance, which is being influenced by the sun and the solar activity and the magnetic field of the earth. I feel sometimes it's related to upgrades, messages. I think that we're going to start developing clair audio skills, where we're going to be able to better interpret, what these right now they just sound like frequencies. And I know too, like when I've done different things with people that have like a lot of energy and we're focusing on something, boy, the ringing in my ears goes off the charts and my whole body will vibrate and people will say we're vibrating. So yeah, there's a lot with that. That's the question, but I think the answer is like multi parts. There's a lot of different things that are involved with it. And unfortunately, I get these spam emails that like, do you have tinnitus? Do you have ringing in the ears? Buy this product and get rid of the ringing in your ears. So a lot of people are experiencing this and they think they have tinnitus. They think, oh yeah, when I was a teenager, I sat too close to speakers at a concert and now I'm paying the price. But no, like chances are something else is going on and it's really good. It's almost like as Earth vibrates more, we're vibrating more. And that's just one of the ways that we're picking up on it. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, thank you. And now I've got a question for you, Jerry, just about, I think this is a good time to switch over to the panel and bring in Akronos, but I don't know, do we go to another Zoom room and just checking in on the tech side? Maybe, do you know, Chris?
So I think we got about 10 more minutes or so to go if we would like, or we can go ahead and cut it now and take a little 10-minute break, everybody, and then come back and reassemble for the panel. That sound good to everyone?
That's good, because then they can send in some questions right now for the panel. We'll have time to catch them.
And there was a question in the chat by Orphan Red that I did catch before I jumped in here.
Oh, go for it, please.
And I appreciate the question, Orphan. We had a very, very long conversation last night in the backstage VIP lounge over there at the Rabbit Hole. And it really touched on a lot of this. And she spoke of a study that Dean Radin did. And sadly, I honestly say I do not know of that particular study. I do apologize, but I will look into it, and I appreciate the advice.
What study was it? There's a chance.
I cannot remember. It's been about a half hour since I've seen the question. I just know it was in the chat. I know it was about a study, and I know I had an answer.
Jerry, you're misremembering, Jerry. I knew it.
Oh, I'm misremembering. That's it.
You're confabulating.
I'm confabulating the mismemory of the question that I don't remember. That's exactly what it is.
Exactly.
Love it. Do you guys have any questions for me? Chris, Cynthia, anything you've gleaned from the talk you'd like to ask about?
Well, I love the talk. I was one thing that came up, I did have something that came to mind. It was just your thoughts on how we could best include that kind of anomalous data that you were talking about. Because I agree with you. There's a problem in science where it's like, this is way out there. Let's throw that data out. Let's not even look at that. So because it's so hardcore built into our scientific system, actually, do you have any thoughts on how we could start pulling science back on track? So that
Well, I would say first, I'm so sorry, Cynthia. I would say first cataloging anything anomalous instead of throwing it out the door or literally throwing it in the trash or pretending it doesn't exist or making it disappear or whatever they're doing with them. If it's not explainable, fine. Admit it's not explainable, catalog it and set it aside until somebody with the right credentials can come along and say, yes, it is, or no, it isn't. But this jumping to an automatic conclusion or saying, no, it doesn't fit this paradigm or it don't work and ignoring it is not helping us any. So I think cataloging would be the first thing. Then once we get a catalog of anomalous effects, then we start to see data patterns that weren't there before because we didn't have the data. Maybe it'll make sense of things that science has been scratching his head on for so long going, yeah, well, we can't explain it, but we refuse to accept that answer because, well, we don't like it. I think it would help a lot if we really just went back to the way we do the scientific method. And if we come up with data that doesn't match what we think it should, don't throw it out, catalog it, set it aside, save it, see what we come up with later.
I'd love to ask Chris also about this because from the quantum businessman, we understand the universe is based on commerce. And I think part of the problem with science is that there's no money or that's the assumption that there's no money in looking at the anomalous data. Any ideas on how we could get some interest there?
As soon as you said the universe is based off commerce, I was like, whoa. So I don't think I'm gonna answer that question directly, but I want to like shed some light on something else. And that is that like, even right now, okay, we can't tell, but our higher consciousness, I believe, we're doing commerce with each other. In other words, each of us has different skills and gifts and different things. And there's trade that goes back and forth on a certain level that a lot of times people aren't aware of, especially when you come together in a cooperative environment, you know, where two or more are gathered, or whatever kind of fundamental wisdom you want to use for that. But yeah, I believe that everything is in the universe has some kind of trading, or, you know, you have this and I need this and this is fair for this trade and that trade. So I believe there's a lot of those things that are going on, and that's just how the whole, you know, universe operates. It's based off of like a trading commerce type thing. So I know I'm not answering that question directly,
That's
but
okay.
I just wanted to mention that. I'm not sure how to get the scientific community involved though.
Yeah, it's good to just get that thought out there. I think the fact that we're asking these questions is excellent. So thank you, Jerry, for putting that in your talk. Really
Well, now I would like to add one more thing to that, if I may, and thank you, Cynthia. And that's the idea that if it's monetized, like you kind of mentioned a moment ago, if you monetize it, if you make it worthwhile, if you will, if there are more people that would come together to literally make grants for research projects, that a lot of scientists want to look into this, but they know they can't because they won't get the funding or they won't get the grants or they get funding pulled. But if there were organizations that could pay these researchers, could do the funding for this kind of stuff, that would also help in the particular research.
Yes.
Yeah,
And Institute of Noetic Science is doing that. We would like to be doing that. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say there's just so many fields of science that really need to be further developed, like the whole concept of quantum biology. Like that has so much potential to really take medicine to a completely other level, because, you know, people don't realize it, but like when you eat food or take a pharmaceutical or a supplement, that supplement or the food you're eating never touches any part of your body. It just passes through it. It's almost like how I'm sitting in this chair right now, but not really, because the atoms aren't really touching each other. So everything is about frequency. Like food has a frequency, supplements have a frequency, pharmaceuticals have a frequency. And when that goes through us, our body can absorb it, and then it gets rid of what it can't use. But just that whole way of thinking has to start to change. And I think once it does, we're going to make leaps and bounds like the field of medicine is going to like go so far ahead with such good results. We'll wonder why we stayed in this mode of, oh, someone has a problem, we must cut them open, or whatever it is. So yes, so when people can actually see that there is value in going and thinking these other ways, and stop shaming people that have the Mandela effect. It's really getting ridiculous at this point, because so many people are getting it, but then you go to your science leaders or religious leaders or political leaders, and they tell you no. So we got to get over that hurdle as well. So I'm glad we're having this conference and people are thinking about these things, because it's what we need to take us to like the next level.
Thank you.
Well, let me tell you, with the questions we've had on this round, people are thinking about these things. I can tell.
I completely agree. And speaking of that, any other thoughts before we take a 10-minute break? Please, everybody, stay tuned. Do you want to make your announcement, Jerry, about the special surprise?
Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, I announced earlier that there was a contest for the best question asked, that we will be giving away 2 books at the end of every day, or 2 winners anyway. We can't exactly hand the books out in person thanks to the digitalization of the conference. However, you will still be a winner and receive your physical copies of Reality Shifts. What is the subtitle of that? I do apologize. I don't have it in front of me.
When consciousness changes the physical world.
There you go. Reality Shifts, When Consciousness Changes the Physical World. 2 free copies every day of the conference. And the only way you can enter is asking the questions. And you guys are rocking on the question. There is a criteria we will be going by to judge them at the end of every day. And there will be 2 winners announced. And we cannot wait. So guys, keep those questions coming. We've got another panel coming up. We got a lot more chances for everybody to win. And Cynthia, go ahead.
Oh, I want to, there's something else that I told you about that's another secret announcement that I would love you, if you want to go for it. Do you remember that one? I just texted you.
Okay, give me just one moment. I do apologize. I've got about 90 things in my head right this second.
This is the one about Junior, about the...
Oh, yes. Yes. Thank you. I am so sorry. Thank you so much. All you had to say was Junior. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned after the panel, because we have a very, very special surprise. Something coming up that has been put together by a member of our community. I mean, to put it short and sweet, a member of our community, a young man who has done an incredible job. Of every member of our community that has made a submission to IMEC in the last, I'd say, month or so. Some of you may know what I'm talking about. I'm not exactly going to give the name of it away just yet. Maybe let some surprise build. But guys, we have a special surprise for everybody after the panel. So please stay tuned. And we will be back, as Cynthia said, momentarily. Cynthia, you want to go ahead and close us out this round?
Yes, thank you so much. So this is bringing us to the close of another excellent presentation. We've got one more panel to go, and then those special surprises that we talked about. So don't go away. Make sure to put your questions in the chat. We'll see them, and we'll be right back. Thanks so much.